Hello, class. Welcome to Respiratory Lecture Part 3, so the last part. So the first one, I talked about upper respiratory tract, nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, broad stuff. In person, Lecture 2, talked about the lower respiratory tracts, so trachea, lung anatomy, all the way down to the alveoli, through the bronchioles, and then talked about some lung function. Here, let me start up this PowerPoint. And we're going to finish respiratory system here. And so we need to go through more about functioning, how the oxygen is actually carried through the bloodstream and carbon dioxide is carried back to the lungs. We'll get to that detail like that. So just a little review. Some of the things I talked about last time about minute ventilation. What's that going to equal? Remember, cardiac output was heart rate times stroke volume. So this is going to be breathing rate, how many breaths per minute, which is usually about 12 or 15. Your heart's beating like 60 beats a minute, right? So think simultaneously as the heart's beating 60 times a minute, and then your breathing is just going to be 12, 15. So your breathing is going on as the heart's beating and the blood is going through the lungs. Yeah. But minute ventilation is going to be breathing rate times how much do you get per breath. So it'll be, and what's that called? That the volume of air that you normally breathe in just resting. It was tidal volume. Tidal volume. And remember those volumes. This is your tidal volume. It's how much you normally breathe in and out. It's about 500 milliliters, half a liter, just normal in and out breathing. But you have this inspiratory reserve that you can call upon. Liters, a couple more liters. Oh. And you can come back to breathe normally again. And then if you breathe out, you can breathe out even more, like another liter. Breathe out more, so like that. Yeah. And if we look at this, if we took the biggest breath in and the biggest breath out, be like, this whole thing between, I can put a different color. Oops. Ooh, geez, color between here and here. That's called your vital capacity. It's the maximum breath you can take in and breathe completely out maximally. Yeah. And now is that your lung volume, your total lung volume? It's not, because remember, you always have air in your lungs you can't get rid of, even with the deepest exhalation. And that's called your residual volume. Residual volume. So together, that'll be your total lung capacity. Includes the vital capacity plus that residual that we can't measure, that you can't blow all the air out of your lungs. There's always going to be some in there. So this is spirometry. Spirometry gives you these things. And you guys, you have certain innate vital capacity. I showed you as you're taller, males generally have bigger vital capacities. It has to do with the size of your lungs and your chest cavity, right? But of course, you know, this as you have disease, et cetera, your vital capacity can get less and less as more of your lung is damaged, et cetera. Yeah, so they measure these things, not because it's interesting, because we can correlate it to your size and sex, is because it's a measure of your lung functioning. And of course, then I mentioned, when we talk about lung functioning, let's see here. What this works. Oh, look at that. Oh, I'm impressed. My eraser. A little messy. All right, we'll go back. We're talking about lung function. We talked about this FEV1. And we'll get into this more in lab, but I want to also do it in lecture as well. I don't normally actually leave it for lab, but I want to this semester just give it a try to make sure you guys introduce it. I introduced you here too. And this is going to be what percentage of your vital capacity can you blow out in 1 second? And so a healthy person, you're going to take the biggest breath in. All right, we're going to see this in lab. We're going to see this is your big breath. So how much could you blow out in 1 second? This is 1 second. Yeah, so if this is like 80 or 90%, you can blow that out. You're nice and healthy. You're good. Now, let's say you're a person that's doing the same test and all of a sudden, see the shape of that? The slope is not so steep. That means you had a hard time exhaling. And in this case, if you looked at, what could you do in 1 second? Oh man, maybe it's like 50% in this case. And so if you have anything less than 70% or so, they look at it's got COPD or asthma. And then also, if you want to know, which is it asthma? Well, the way you test that is that you give then a bronchodilator, albuterol or something, do the test again. And if you go, oh, things look fine, well, then it's asthma. Asthma is reversible when you dilate things. But if it is chronic bronchitis or something like that, no amount of drugs is going to open those tubes up. All right. So what this is really, this test, FEV1 or FEC, is a test of how big your breathing tubes are. And if they're big, there's little resistance to the air. You can blow it out fast. If they're small, it's like blowing out of a little straw. It takes a lot of energy to do that. It takes a long time, right? And the reason why, I mean, the diameter could be usually the muscles are constricted, and then you got, mucus buildup in there. You got a bunch of, snot in there. It's going to narrow that diameter too, make it harder to blow out. All right. So there you go. A little review talking about spirometry and lung volumes, and then that lung functioning that they test that all the time. If you're going into test for lung function, that FEV1 over FVC. All right, let's talk breathing. Well, breathing is interesting because it's involuntary. You guys, even unconscious in a coma, sleep, you breathe, right? But it's voluntary too. Like I can hold my breath. I can hyperventilate. I can control it too. So you have this dual control. It goes on autopilot unless you are deciding to control your breathing. And it's done this rhythmic. I say about 12 breaths a minute, kind of an average there. And that can crank up to like 40 breaths a minute. You can really hyperventilate if you're exercising or anxiety attack, something like that. So where do we control breathing? Well, same place we controlled heart rates. It's going to be in your brain stem, right? Your cerebrum up here is for higher thought, decision-making, memory, things like that. But your brain stem is for the basic parts of survival, like your heart rate and coughing, reflexes, vomiting, blood pressure. All these things are your stem that controls those important things. And particularly when you look at the respiratory centers, you'll see you got in the medulla. You can't get any more brainstem than medulla, right? You're going to have this dorsal and a ventral group there that kind of goes up and down the medulla. And then the pons, there's a pons region too. So this is where we have figured out where breathing control occurs. And interestingly, heart rate is really close to your cardiac center is close to this respiratory center. And so you have with each breath, you actually have a change in your heart rate a little bit. It's I don't want to get into it too much, but you have your breathing actually inhibits the heart rate for a second, and it changes that. So if you're really good and you look at an ECG and you look at breathing, you can see slight changes in some people with breaths with heart rate. Anyway, let's get back to this. So the control of this, I don't expect you to get too much into the weeds here, but pretty much these control centers will send signals down through your phrenic nerve to your diaphragm and other spinal nerves that go to your intercostal muscles in your chest and your ribs that will adjust inspiration and expiration. And you'll see if you have need for more oxygen in your body, these signals will cause your breathing to be more rapid and deeper. And if you're just resting, they'll cause them to slow down. So just like heart rate goes up and down, stroke volume, you can change breathing rate and depth. And yeah, and your brain just takes care of both the heart rate and the breathing rate, depending on your body's needs. Yeah, I threw the slide here just so you to remember again. I'm not going to get into any more detail about where we think kind of well, where we think, breathing, the rate is kind of determined, and that the pons maybe kind of influences that. But basically, you got these medulla areas and this pons area that are going to influence the rate and depth of your breathing. All right. And we'll talk about what causes that and what causes you to stop breathing faster. I like giving you guys a little hints a little ahead of time. You think it's probably like low oxygen levels. So oxygen levels in your body are going to control your breathing. It's actually not. Wait do you see this? It's actually carbon dioxide and how acidic, because carbon dioxide turns into acid in your blood. Yeah, so carbon dioxide. It's going to increase as you exercise because you're burning more sugar, more carbon dioxide. But yeah, you think it would be oxygen levels, but you're going to find out that that only kicks in if it's like a real emergency. Normally it's carbon dioxide levels. All right, stepping back. We're going to talk about oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. They're going to be, high in the air, and then they're going to be lower deep in your tissues, and your blood is going to carry it there, right? So when we talk about gases, instead of talking, the way we talk about concentration with gases, we're going to talk about it as a partial pressure. It's just a way in physics to talk about, in chemistry, to talk about the concentration of a gas. And as you know, I talked about in lecture that normal atmospheric pressure at sea level is 760 millimeters mercury, 1 atmosphere. And so the way you do this is that we know that oxygen's about 21% of this. And so 21% of 760 is 160. So we talk about the partial pressure of oxygen as kind of the concentration of it is going to be 160. So if we put a glass of water out on the table, eventually it would equilibrate the air and the gases in the water, and they would both be the same. Yeah, but most of this air is nitrogen. Look at that, 78%. And that's all useless for us. It's just kind of an inert gas that comes in, it goes into our blood, but we don't do anything with it. But oxygen, of course, we do something with it. And just to look at carbon dioxide levels, about 3%. No, not 3%, 0.03%. So it's a very small percentage of the atmospheric air. All right, so and again, talking about these gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, they have to dissolve in liquid. So we'll see that wet lining in our blood is liquid. So just like we force carbon dioxide into cans of beer or cans of soda, same thing here. You take gases and you can put it into the fluid. All right. And so, basically, hope you get the idea that here in your lungs, we're going to see here in your lungs, you're going to ventilate these lungs, meaning you're going to bring air in and out, fresh air. And we'll see the concentration of oxygen out here is what? What was the partial pressure of it? 160 in this room. And then as you breathe it in, we're going to see it's going to mix with the dead air in your lungs. It's going to be about 104. Like, why is it so much little? Well, because we don't completely exhaust our lungs out. There's always dead air. So there's less oxygen levels deep in there. But you're going to see the blood that's coming by has even less because it's coming from your body where it's lost all that. It's going to be 40, 45, something like that. We'll see very shortly. And so what happens here is that there's more oxygen in your air in your lungs than there is in the blood. It's going to go in here until eventually it's going to be equilibrate to the same as the air in the lungs as it is in the blood, 104. And then we're going to see, by the time the blood leaves the lungs, it's joined by other blood that's like draining the lungs, and it's going to be about 95. And so when we get down to it, you're going to see the oxygen level of your arterial blood, if you were to take a sample, should be about 95. It was 104, but the lung itself uses some oxygen, and so it brings it down to that. Yeah. And then this is going to travel out to your tissues. And then you get deep to your biceps, you're working them out, you're like burning the sugar to get ATP to get that energy. And so you're using all that oxygen, right? And so until you get down the tissues, here's your cells. The oxygen level down your tissues is like 40. Yeah, low. Well, because let's say it's coming by at 95. Here's the blood coming by. What's going to happen here? Well, diffusion, that oxygen in the blood is going to like come out and it's going to go this way. And so it's going to release that oxygen into these hungry tissues. And so the blood leaving this is going to be around 40. And you notice what happens here is that the blood leaving it is it's going to equilibrate. And so if the tissues are 40, the blood may start out like 95, it's going to be 85, 75, 65, 55, and it's going to be 41, it's going to be 40, it's going to lose that one, and they're both going to be 40. And so there's no more transfer once they're the same. And it comes back to the lungs, it's freaking 104. It's like lots of oxygen in the lungs. The blood's only like 40. So what's going to happen? It's going to go into the blood. So the blood's going to go 45, 50, 55, 60, 75, 85, 100, 102, 103. By the time it's 104, the oxygen has gone into the blood. It can't go any higher than that because it's 104 in the lungs. And so it's going to stay at 104 when it leaves. So this is diffusion. And as long as you have the blood and the air for long enough time for them to transfer, to diffuse from higher to lower concentration, they're going to equilibrate like that. All right, so this is kind of like an overview looking at your whole body, that they're in the pulmonary circuit, your blood's going to pick up that oxygen, it's going to carry it to the tissues, and it's going to release it to the tissues and come back empty and get refilled. Yeah, very, very cool. All right, so back to breathing rates. So, obviously consciously you can control your breathing rate. I can breathe at any rate that I want to. Right, see, I just did it, right? But of course, it's going to increase unconsciously during exercise and stress, and whether you're, I was going to say, whether you're scared or whether you're aroused, your breathing rate, you go into a cold shower, your breathing rate can go up as well, kind of with fright kind of thing. And then carbon dioxide levels and how acidic you are really increases your breathing rate big time. And oxygen can increase it only if there's like a big dip in your oxygen levels, then you can start breathing quicker. Yeah. And you also have a reflex so that you can't blow out your lungs. And so there's going to be, when you stretch your lungs, there's a nerve reflex that once it's stretched, then it stops your breathing. So you just can't keep blowing them up. So that's one less thing to worry about, right? And of course, you can decrease it just by consciously thinking about it. You can hold your breath, and when you sleep, your breathing rate's going to go down low. Yeah, cool. All right, so we're talking about control. What's going to cause you to breathe either rapidly and deeper, or shallowly and lower breathing rate? So what's going to change your breathing rate? And you go to the gym, treadmill, hey, your breathing rate goes up. You got it. If you lay on the couch, your breathing rate goes down, right? So how does what's controlling that? Well, it turns out it is not oxygen levels, as I said. It is really going to be I'll show you this. Look at this formula down below. This is a very important formula. I don't give you a lot of chemistry, but this is so important in your body. Carbon dioxide levels, they are going to go up. Well, the more you make ATP, right? So that glucose molecule is going to be put into 6 carbon dioxides that's going to bubble out, and it's going to bubble out into your body fluids in your blood. Now, carbon dioxide, what happens to carbon dioxide is that it binds with water and turns into carbonic acid. So carbon dioxide and acidity are just absolutely linked. One of the bottom lines from this lecture is that carbon dioxide causes acidity because it makes carbonic acid. And that carbonic acid is a weak acid. It disassociates here pretty easily into bicarbonate ions. And then, of course, you have hydrogen ions. That's what makes it acidic, right? Yeah, so carbon dioxide binds with water to make this carbonic acid. That turns into bicarbonate ions, which you got tons of them in your body, and then hydrogen ions, which are acidic. So carbon dioxide is correlated with acidity in your body. If I hold my breath, dramatic, wasn't it? My carbon dioxide levels will build because I'm not breathing it out, and my acidity, I'll get more and more acid. It happened in that short a period of time. Yeah. So these chemoreceptors that are figuring out my carbon dioxide levels, my acidity, turns out you have central ones to be in your brain stem. So on the front of the medulla, you're measuring that cerebrospinal fluid for acidity and carbon dioxide. And as it gets more acid, it's going to cause you to breathe faster, even hyperventilate if you have to. And if it becomes really alkaline, let's say you hyperventilate for a while, then you don't have to breathe. And then it's going to like inhibit your breathing. So your cardiac center in your medulla is going to be measuring, did I say cardiac? Respiratory center in your medulla is going to be measuring your acidity and carbon dioxide. And that's to be a central chemoreceptor in your brain. Now you also have peripheral receptors, we'll see down in our carotid bodies, that are also measuring in your peripheral blood the same chemicals. Yeah. So that's it. In your medulla, you're measuring the pH and carbon dioxide, how acidic it is. And as acidity goes up, that means you need to breathe faster because you need to get rid of that carbon dioxide. Yeah, and interesting, I'll talk about later about if you have carbon monoxide poisoning, you give oxygen because you need that. And also you always give a little carbon dioxide too, because carbon dioxide is what's stimulating breathing rate. And so independent of the oxygen levels, they're often correlated. You know, you hold your breath, oxygen levels will decrease, carbon dioxide levels will go up. But just give a little carbon dioxide, it's going to cause your body to ventilate faster. All right, so central receptors are in your brain, central nervous system, and peripheral is receptors out in the periphery, outside your brain. And again, this looks familiar with blood pressure, right? You have aortic bodies and these carotid bodies. So where that carotid artery comes up and splits, there's like a swelling that measures pressure with a baroreceptor. And there are chemoreceptors that are measuring the blood composition, and they're seeing how much carbon dioxide, how acidic, and how much oxygen too. And they're telling the brain. So your brain, the respiratory center, has its own chemoreceptors, central, and then also listens to nerve impulses a little bit lower down in the carotids, which are going to the brain and the aorta. So this is important. So carbon dioxide is what's really driving this. But if oxygen levels fall really far down, less than 50%, if oxygen levels fall that, then it's going to kick in so you breathe faster. But I'll let you in on this. Normal blood, it's going to leave your heart after coming to your lungs like 100% saturated, like filled with oxygen. It's going to dump a lot of that oxygen, but guess what? It doesn't come back with an empty tank. It comes back about 75% full. So every time blood returns to your lungs, it's just getting topped off. Like if you filled up your car and you drove it till it was like 3/4 of a tank and you fill it up, that's what your body does. Yeah. And it's nice because it's like a nice reserve. And so like if you really need that oxygen, you've got more to get rid of. If you're being suffocated or you're really working out hard, you have that backup. And so these receptors here, they're measuring oxygen levels, but in you and me, normally we don't even use this oxygen level unless like extreme circumstances. But if oxygen levels fall below 50%, and they shouldn't fall below like 75% normally, then they kick in. Yeah, so it's kind of like a backup, and it frees your body to not worry about oxygen levels, to just use carbon dioxide. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So like I say, this was another revelation that I didn't realize. I thought, oh, you fill up with oxygen in the lungs, you use it in the body, it comes back with an empty tank, you fill it up again. But really, it comes back like 75% full of oxygen. You just top it off. And that gives us a buffer, allows us to have that like stored oxygen in the bank in case we need it. Yeah. But patients that have remember COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease like emphysema and things like that, if their lungs are really shot, then they're kind of chronically low on oxygen, then this becomes a factor. So, you get a person in the hospital, elderly person, then actually oxygen levels are driving this. But in healthy people, no. All right. So let's take a look. I've talked a lot about this. So blood pH and carbon dioxide are the main drivers of your breathing rate and depth. Oxygen can kick in when it's below 50%, when there's a real issue. And then you have your respiratory centers in your medulla and your pons, and they send down signals. Your phrenic nerve goes to the diaphragm, and then you have other nerves that go to your muscles in your chest. And then, of course, there's a feedback. There's nerves in your lung itself that measure how stretched it is. So you get this feedback. Your respiratory centers taking this all in. It's taking what your carbon dioxide levels, your oxygen levels, the stretchiness of your lungs, and it sends out motor to control your breathing. Yeah, awesome. All right. So if we hold your breath, think about that, do that, or everyone do that. Hold your breath and think about what's happening, especially like carbon dioxide and acidity. Are you doing it? Okay, I'm not doing it because I'm talking. All right, but I hope I'll do it sometime. I'm sure you've all held your breath. But what's going on is that inside my body, when I did that, carbon dioxide levels are rising. Tick tock, because I'm not breathing it out anymore. It's just rising. So oxygen levels will go down, but carbon dioxide will rise. It'll make carbonic acid, right? And then it's going to make acid. And so my acidity levels, I'm becoming acidotic. And that's the easiest way to change your pH is hold your breath. You're going to become acidic because carbon dioxide will build up. That will turn into carbonic acid, which will make hydrogen ions. You'll be acidic. Yeah. Well, if your kid tells you, I'm going to hold my breath till you buy me that toy, and I'm going to hold it and I'm going to die, and you're going to feel horrible because you were a bad parent and you loved me, let them hold their breath. You just stare at them because they can't. They'll breathe. So yeah, you can't kill yourself by holding your breath. Your increasing acidity will overwhelm any conscious ability to stop, to hold your breath and die. It's actually a sport, holding your breath. You thought, oh, me and my little brother or sister did it in the pool, for fun. Well, you can make a life's work out of it if you're really good at holding your breath. It's called static apnea. Uh, um, and apnea, yeah, you're stopping your breathing. And it's done as a sport. Turns out underwater is a really good motivator not to breathe because you're underwater and without scuba. And so this sport, they you can look it up. It's extremely dangerous sport. People die horrible deaths. It's really bad when things go wrong, but they go down on a rope underwater, and they don't want to eat anything. They don't want to think anything. They just want to let their mind drift to a calm place, and so that they slow their heart rate and they can see how long can they last and just the oxygen, how much can they tolerate that acidity rising in their body. 22 minutes. Okay, this is a caveat. This is with taking oxygen pure oxygen before you go down. All right. But even without oxygen, just holding your breath, 11 minutes, this guy. It's almost 12. You're thinking to yourself, I can do 12. I'll be in the world record book. Try it. All right. You try holding your breath for more. We did it in lab to see how long I hold your breath. And people are like, a minute and a half. All right. Okay. Yeah. See, it's not as easy as you think. So these people, I mean, they train. A lot of it is genetics. You're born with a large vital capacity, a large total lung capacity. And before doing this, person probably should hyperventilate. So you've got as much, oxygen build up, and then take a full breath and then see how long you can go. Yeah. So, filling the lungs with oxygen adds 10 minutes. It's kind of cheating though. If you're just doing it like at the pool, your bathtub, you don't have a tank of pure oxygen. So, yeah. Yeah, and your breathing rate. So exercise is the obvious, reason why it goes up because you have a greater need in your body for your muscles to have more oxygen. But you can see arousal or fear, or yeah, other things also change your breathing rate, don't they? So hypoventilation, be breathing slowly, and hyperventilation is breathing fast, right? And so hyperventilation, I mean, it is useful if you want to hold your breath. It kind of like blows out that carbon dioxide, gives you a little bit of a head start. I should say it is dangerous though. Like, if you're using, I just told you, you should do that to hold your breath longer. Yeah, it's true, but there's some danger because if you hyperventilate, you can pass out. If you're underwater, you can drown. But hyperventilating happens to some people with anxiety, things like that. And you wonder why do you breathe into a paper bag? Well, that'll help because if you're hyperventilating, you actually get rid of too much carbon dioxide and you become alkaline. Your pH goes up, and that can, like I said, constrict blood vessels and make you pass out. So rebreathing through a paper bag is going to help keep your carbon dioxide level higher because it's actually too low if you breathe too fast. Yeah, and what's so incredible, I talked about cardiac output in exercise, how you can go from a normally 5 liters a minute, like a normal cardiac output, you can go to 40 liters a minute. Look at that jump. Think about a 5 liters, then 40 liters, how much more that is. Well, this is how much we can measure how much oxygen is consumed. And it can go from 250 oxygen, probably milliliters, I'm guessing, actually not milliliters, to 3,600. So yeah. And then you guys are into exercise physiology, things like that. Of course, they can put you in a whole chamber. They do it with like crabs and things, but probably they got a breathing apparatus and they'll measure oxygen use. And you can see, yeah, so you can crank it up. Yeah. And you all know the feeling of, running a race and just feeling like, I don't have enough oxygen, I'm not gonna be able to continue this. And if you look at, athletic performance, you're going to say, is it the heart's ability to move the blood, or is the lungs' ability to breathe, get air in there? And of course, if you breathe faster and deeper, you're bringing more air. You're getting more air that's going to be able to go across the blood. And it's usually the heart that can't pump as much blood. You rarely have issues. Your lungs are so big, they've got enough leeway that the breathing isn't really the issue. It's more, can you carry that oxygen? Oh, this is fascinating. Okay, you guys, this is in your book. It's a little thing in here, but the thought is, of course, if you exercise, carbon dioxide levels will build in your blood, and then it'll cause you to start breathing faster. Got it? I taught you that. When we find out, if you measure someone as before when they start exercising, their breathing actually increases. There's never this like jump in carbon dioxide levels. How can that be? And what we think happens is that your cerebrum, your conscious part of your brain, when it feels when your muscles and joints start moving, it automatically starts the breathing faster process. So you don't have to have that dip. So you prepare your body. Isn't that smart? That's so cool. So it doesn't wait until oxygen levels drop and then start breathing faster. Actually, it's the movement of your muscles and the proprioceptors in your joints that tell your brain, dude, we're going to need to breathe faster. I promise you. I've been there before, right? And your body does that. So really, really cool. And you can see here with exercise, and I just threw up a couple slides I found because you guys are interested in exercise. Looking at respiratory rate, breaths per minute, and your tidal volume, how both those increase with exercise intensity. Beautiful. And yeah, and if you look at this is to help you just practice with these volumes, you can see, what happens as you increase your minute ventilation, how much, if you increase the amount of air that you're exchanging, like what actually happens? Well, you can see your tidal volume goes from 1/2 liter, and then, yeah, you use up some of the inspiratory and some of the expiratory reserve to widen that tidal volume. So if I measured you on a treadmill, your tidal volume would be several liters. And if you sat down and you had rested, it's going to be 1/2 liter. So yeah, you're going to eat into that reserve, right? As your minute ventilation goes up as you exercise. Yeah. And this just shows you here again, look at your whole lung capacity. This is review. I like to keep getting you guys looking at that. This vital capacity is the maximum amount you can breathe in, completely exhale. And this residual volume is always stuck in your lungs. We can't blow it out. All right. Yeah, just some more exercising. You can see with treadmill velocity there, you can see we're looking at breathing rate going from 12 or 15 up to 70 breaths a minute, and then looking at what's the volume of your tidal capacity, tidal volume. It's actually 0.5 liters, and it can go up to 2.5 liters. Yeah. So you start exercising, your breathing rate and your tidal volumes, not like one or the other. They both go up like that. Cool. I noticed that there's kind of a maximum here, this asymptote breathing rate. Once you're you're breathing more than 70 times in a minute, more than 1 a second, I don't think there's enough time to fill the lungs. I mean, you're just kind of fluttering too fast. Yeah. All right. A little summarizing table, help you study. You can see there is that stretch reflex so that your body knows when you're inflating your lungs and you can't overinflate them. And then oxygen is, you perceive that in your peripheral chemoreceptors and the carotid arteries and in your aorta, and it's telling you only when oxygen levels drop below 50%, then it speeds it up. Much more importantly is those same peripheral receptors are measuring carbon dioxide, and they'll tell you when that goes up, you want to breathe faster. And then the central receptor in your brain, in the medulla itself, is looking at cerebrospinal fluid. And when carbon dioxide levels go up and acidity goes up, increases. All right, that's what's controlling your breathing. It's mostly carbon dioxide / acidity. Those are just absolutely correlated. And secondarily, oxygen is a backup. Yep. All right, we'll talk about a couple things here. So that static apnea, remember that? That was holding your breath. Now, sleep apnea is when you stop breathing when you sleep. Yeah. And it's really two things that could cause that. If it's a neurological problem, it's a central problem, that means that your brain doesn't tell you to breathe. And that's, you don't see that in adults, but you'll see that unless there's some kind of damage. You'll see that in infants. And so, parents worry if their kids, sometimes if they're worried about an issue, they'll put a monitor on the kids. So when it sleeps, if it stops breathing, an alarm will go off, kind of thing. And they found early on kids should sleep on their back. Sometimes they sleep on their belly, more likely to get this sudden infant death syndrome. It's incredibly sad where an infant stops breathing, and so, yeah, centrally controlled. But in adults, when we look at sleep apnea, your partner snores a lot, they could be having sleep apnea. And if you don't seem to get a restful sleep and you snore, and like during the day you're tired and cause depression, things like that, it could be because you're not getting enough sleep. And sleep apnea in adults is where they stop breathing for like 10 seconds. So that's a lifetime. That's a long time. And then you start breathing again. And it happens over and over again all night, and you're not getting a restful sleep. Yeah, you can imagine like having like kind of choking in your sleep everyone's all night long. And so what they do, it's normally obstructive, means it's usually you have your soft palate back there, uvula, something is causing the snoring and causing the stoppage of breath. And so, I mean, they can do surgery if it's serious, but I'll show you, they have a machine that can help with that. And so you think maybe I have sleep apnea, I'm never get enough rest, even though I'm sleeping, and someone tells me the sleeping next to you tells me I stop breathing during the night, or I'm snoring and then I stop breathing and come back. You can do a sleep study. And I had a friend that she did that, went to work at night and worked all night, and they hook people up and as they sleep, and they can see what happens. And so let's take a look at this. Let's see. Blood oxygen levels. Oh yeah. See where it dipped? And then they can see, oh yeah, here's a breathing event where they stop breathing. And then they'll have you look at your brain activity, so they know when you're in REM sleep and when you're sleeping. And so they run this all night long, and they can look at your chest, and you can see they have a blood oxygen level here in your finger, and so they can tell what's going on. And if they see multiple times where your oxygen levels drop, where you stop breathing, yeah, then they can give you this machine called Cpap, or you guys probably know about this, but if you have this obstructive sleep apnea, sometimes it's just a mouth guard kind of thing that keeps your tongue out of the way, so that keeps it open, or this positive pressure kind of machine. I heard they're kind of noisy, but you sleep with this thing and it forces air, so you don't have sleep apnea. But it's kind of cumbersome. You got to sleep with it. All right. Doing good, guys. All right. All right, let's look at gas exchange. Let's look at how blood carries the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Let's get right down to it. So I talked about in the last lecture about that membrane, the respiratory membrane. And now here's a blood cell over here. This is obviously blood, and this will be, how do I do air? This is like air over here. And so this membrane right here is going to be made up of the endothelial cell of the blood vessel, maybe a little surfactant, right? A little moist fluid there. And then the thin alveolar cell. Really, both these are squamous. And then the basement membranes here. But that is the respiratory membrane, wicked thin. and it allows exchange of gases because it's wet and it's really thin. So gases just go really quickly across it. All right. And the alveoli, remember these little polygons, look like little clusters of grapes. And they do have pores that allow, some airflow to go between them as well. Yeah, so I'll just look at this one more time. So if you're looking at alveoli, look in there, the type 1 alveolar cells, or they're called type 1 pneumocytes. What else do they call this? So there's a couple names, but the type 1 cells are all these squamous cells, wicked thin, and they make up that wall between the blood and the air. And then the type 2 alveolar cells are ones that'll be found in the corners. I don't know if they're showing it here. Yeah, and they're going to be secreting surfactant. Surfactant is that fatty substance that decreases surface tension so the walls don't stick together. And then this illustration also shows some macrophages. You know what? Actually, they're green, and they show these are going to be the type 2 making surfactant. The macrophages are these little blue guys. I didn't mean to confuse you there, but all the flat cells are the type 1 simple squamous cells. And then the round ones, in this case, they're green. They're in the corners making surfactant. And then the macrophages will be the blue ones down here. And they're like little amoebas that are going through and eating up any bacteria that got in there and debris. All right, so a close-up again. This is this respiratory membrane, so delicate. But here's the blood vessel. So you're going to have the squamous cell of the blood vessel, the squamous cell of the alveoli, then the basement membranes in between. So a little bit of space in between. And then, yeah, super thin. All right, some numbers for you. It's not a lot of numbers, but let's just realize this. When we look at the blood that's coming back from your body, it's going to be low in oxygen. So it's coming in through the vena cava. It's on its way to the lungs. So the oxygen levels are only 40. Yeah, as I told you earlier. The carbon dioxide levels are going to be 45. All right, so that's the blood coming back to your heart, and that's going to go to your lungs to get oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide. Now, what is it like in the air in your lungs, deep in your lungs? Well, in this room, it's 160. But deep in your lungs, the oxygen is going to be 104 because there's a lot of dead air in there, right? But still okay. It's still 104 is a lot more than 40. That's all you need is a difference. And so oxygen is going to go into the blood because it goes from 104 to 40. Yeah. And it's going to go 104 to 40. It's going to go 45, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 101, 2, 3, 104. It's never going to 105 because it's 104 up here, right? It's only going to get to 104. So it's going to leave oxygen the same partial pressure as the air in your alveoli. So it comes in 40, and that's going to leave at 104 is what the air is in your lungs, the same. Yeah. And carbon dioxide is going to be at 45. It's only 40 in the air in your lungs. So carbon dioxide is going to go from the blood to your lungs where you can breathe it out. And so, of course, it's going to leave the same. So really, these are the same numbers, if you notice that. So the blood leaving is going to be equilibrated to the percentages in the air in your lungs. It could never get any better than that because it's just going to go to the same, and that's it. So it can't be any movement after that. And then one more number to throw at you. Remember, the blood oxygen levels are really going to be 95 when it gets back to your aorta, et cetera, because your lungs are going to steal a little bit of that oxygen. All right. Beautiful. When you think about this diffusion, when you study diffusion, some of the important things in diffusion are, of course, surface area. Your lungs are the size of alveoli are half of a tennis court, 75 square meters. So a huge surface area is awesome. And then it's going to depend on how thick this membrane is. The thinner, the better. But some diseases like pneumonia will thicken that respiratory membrane. It's going to decrease diffusion. Diffusion we're talking about is going to be, the movement across there. And then what else is going to affect diffusion will be the concentration differences. The bigger the concentration difference, the more diffusion is going to take place. So surface area, concentration differences. So if a person having problems getting enough oxygen, you can give them pure oxygen, right? But you've seen that tube around their nose. So that'll help, is changing the concentration differences. Some things that'll hurt is if you lose surface area. You'll see emphysema, you go from delicate little alveoli to big bubbles. They're gonna have less surface area. So lung damage will be less surface area. It might affect the respiratory membrane, thickening it. That's not good. And then if you're not ventilating enough, it's not going to be that big a difference in concentration gradient. So all these things will affect how oxygenated your blood will be. All right, so the gases carbon dioxide and oxygen. These are the ones I'm going to talk about now. So let's do it. Let's see how they move. So oxygen is going to be 99% of the oxygen binds with hemoglobin. And oxygen hemoglobin makes oxyhemoglobin, kind of bright red blood. About 1 or 2% will just dissolve in the plasma. So it's just a minor part. So almost all of it binds on that hemoglobin. And then it's gonna, when blood leaves the lungs, it's almost completely saturated with oxygen. And then it reaches the tissues, it's gonna lose that oxygen, but it comes back 75% full. All right. And then it gets topped off again to 100% and leaves. What's carrying is you guys know the molecule hemoglobin, right? And the globin is going to be this protein, these 4 polypeptide chains, and then the heme part is going to have iron in it. The heme part there, yeah. We talked about this with blood, yeah. And in the lungs, of course, that iron part is going to bind with oxygen, but not too tightly. It has to bind with oxygen and needs to release it down in your tissues. So it can't be like a solid, like H2O, it doesn't let go. It has to bind, but let go. So oxygen is going to bind reversibly to that heme and the hemoglobin. And some numbers, I just kind of did some calculations here. 250 million hemoglobin molecules per red blood cell. We have trillions of red blood cells. So yeah, you think about all the gases that are being moved. And yeah, and this will show you the blood that leaves the arteries is at 95 partial pressure of oxygen, and the tissues are like at 40. So clearly the oxygen is going to come out of the blood and go into the tissues. Yep. And this is called a dissociation curve. You can figure this out in chemistry. But what I want to show you is that here, like normal, like 95 partial pressure of oxygen, it's nearly completely saturated. How much of the hemoglobin is full. When the blood leaves your lungs, it's almost like 98% full of oxygen when it's leaving the lungs. But when it gets down to the area of let's say we're down in where the cells are, then you can see it loses. It's going to lose, like a 75% actually. And this is all kind of coming together, isn't it? So when the blood gets down to the tissues, it's going to lose. The oxygen is no longer wanting to be attached. It's going to disassociate and bubble off. So when there's lots of oxygen, it's going to stick to the hemoglobin. When the blood goes to areas with low oxygen, let's say you're working on a muscle, it's going to release that oxygen. It's going to no longer be bound. It's going to disassociate from the hemoglobin. The oxygen is going to travel to the tissues. And so the coolest thing about your body, oh my God, is that the oxygen goes where it's needed. But you don't have to have this mind behind it. Like let's say I'm working on my arms, just my biceps, my right bicep. I don't need my mind to tell me, okay, open up, deliver the blood here and get rid of the oxygen here. It happens just because of chemistry. Now, if I'm working on just my right biceps, it's getting warm, carbon dioxide is building, and it's getting acidic in that tissue. And if you look at the chemistry of it, when it's warm, acidic, lots of carbon dioxide, those are related, that's when the oxygen disassociates and comes off the hemoglobin easily. So the most active tissues in your body take the most oxygen because that's when the oxygen leaves. And if I got blood moving through my ear or something, I'm not using much, it just stays stuck. And it waits, it's going to release it wherever there's low levels of oxygen and where tissues are active and warm and lots of carbon dioxide. All right, so this is the chemistry behind hemoglobin, letting go of the oxygen in regions that your body needs it. Very cool. I'll talk about carbon dioxide quickly. So actually, these things have gone up in COVID days. No, not COVID days. Because of I was thinking down in Texas with all the that cold wave. They had no electricity. People were burning things indoors, you know. And so carbon monoxide is a gas that builds up when you burn gasoline and other things, cigarette smoke, and it's colorless, it's odorless, and so it's very dangerous because monoxide binds with hemoglobin stronger, like 200 times stronger than oxygen. And it doesn't want to let go. And so if you're here and you got like you left the car running in the garage and carbon monoxide is leaking in, you're slowly gonna breathe that in. It's gonna bind and take up all that space in your hemoglobins, so you can't carry oxygen. So you become cyanotic, you'll turn blue, you'll have a headache and perish because you're not getting enough oxygen. So carbon dioxide, you got any kind of heater in a tent or enclosed space and it's not burning right, a furnace that's not burning right. That's why you have carbon monoxide detectors, because it's, again, you don't smell it or anything. You'll have like a headache and that's be the first symptom. You could die. Yep. Yeah, what do you want to do with someone with carbon monoxide poisoning is getting them out in the open and get them breathing, ventilating. And they'll give them oxygen and a little carbon dioxide to get them breathing. And you just got to like download that carbon monoxide and hopefully get enough oxygen to the tissues so they can survive. Another cool thing is that we have like 3 different types of hemoglobin. They're all cousins that come from gene duplication, but we have our normal adult hemoglobin that we make, but we have a fetal hemoglobin that we make. I think we have like a childhood one too, but in the fetus, think about the fetus. It's living in the mother as a parasite, really. And it needs oxygen, but it has to steal it from mom's blood. So the fetal hemoglobin is stickier. Its hemoglobin binds easier than our adult hemoglobin. And that's awesome. It allows the fetus to steal that oxygen from mom's blood because mom's holding on to it for her own sake. And so the fetus has to be a little more sticky to get that hemoglobin. Yeah. And there's some like diseases, therapies where they try to turn on that fetal hemoglobin gene and stuff. It's kind of cool. And then myoglobin, when we did muscles to talk about myoglobin, it's a cousin of hemoglobin and it sits in your muscles and it can hold oxygen. But it holds tighter than hemoglobin, which means it will only release that oxygen under really low oxygen conditions. So if you're really working out your muscle like crazy, you know, and you're not getting enough oxygen to it, the myoglobin will release that oxygen and give you a little burst of that ATP because you use that for that. So myoglobin is found in muscles and has a higher affinity for oxygen. It does not let go as easily, which is cool because it's a backup, like a backup generator that's sitting there waiting. If it was really needed, it can release that oxygen, give you a little burst. That's what makes dark meat dark. More capillaries, more blood, more myoglobin. All right, so let's talk. So oxygen is carried almost exclusively in the hemoglobin bind to the heme. All right, carbon dioxide a little more complicated. It's got like 3 different ways to get back. So carbon dioxide is produced in all of your cells that are burning sugar. They give off carbon. All those carbons come out as carbon dioxide. So I'm breathing it out. I'm getting rid of it, but it has to get back to my lungs in the blood, right? So 3 ways it gets back. Some of it is actually just dissolved in the plasma, where oxygen's only like 1 or 2%. It's maybe like 7%. So it dissolves a little easier right into the plasma, the water. But then you're going to see it can bind to hemoglobin, but not to the heme, like to the globin. And then most of it comes back because the carbon dioxide binds with water to turn into carbonic acid, and that's how it comes back. I'll show you. So yes, I'll give you the percentages. Why hide them? So some of it just dissolves in the plasma, like 7%. That's cool, right? And oxygen is like 1 or 2%. But then here, the carbon dioxide can bind to hemoglobin, but it goes on to the amino group on the globin part. What's important in that is it doesn't compete with oxygen because oxygen's on the heme. Carbon dioxide just goes over here. It just combined here and it can carry it back to the lungs where it releases it. Yeah. So carbaminohemoglobin. So hemoglobin has carbon dioxide bound to it. It doesn't bother the oxygen capacity at all because it's on a different part. But most of it, you can see 70%, the carbon dioxide will bind with water to make carbonic acid. The carbonic acid turns into bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ions. You might think, damn, it's going to get real acidic with all that hydrogen ion formation. But it turns out that the hemoglobin's a good buffer. It will bind the hydrogen ion. It will bind it and it will carry it back and release it. Yeah. This particular reaction wouldn't happen as quickly. Carbon dioxide and water, there's an enzyme called carbonic carbonic anhydrase. This is an important enzyme that is going to speed up combining carbon dioxide and water. And so it's found a lot in blood cells. And this, I don't know how interesting this is, but the book talks about it, so I will. So you make all these bicarbonate ions, and so they go into the bloodstream. And then it turns out that when you lose a lot of negatives, it's going to cause negatives to come back in. So chlorine comes back in to replace it, and this happens, called a chloride shift. There you go, I told you. And then back at the lungs, that carbon dioxide is dissolved in plasma, bubbles out. The carbon dioxide that was bound to the hemoglobin is going to be released. And then the bicarbonate ions are going to combine with the hydrogen to make carbonic acid. It's going to turn into water and carbon dioxide. So everything's going to be reversed as it goes back. All right, you guys got it? Carbon dioxide is carried by being dissolved. Carbon dioxide is going to bind to hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide is going to turn into bicarbonate ions. That's the way it's going to come back. All right. And of course, in your blood, if you have alcohol in your blood, it's also going to go from high to low concentration. It's going to come out in the air, and you'll be able to detect it with machines. All right. So study that, how oxygen, carbon dioxide, how it chemically gets back. All right, I'll let you, I don't think I need to play this now. I'll let you guys play it on your own if you want, but it's this is a nice video showing the whole thing together. And I'll start it. And it's just amazing because it all happens. You can see here, fresh air, and the air in your lungs is, some of it's stale. And so there's 160 oxygen out here. It's only like 104 deep in your lungs, but you ventilate it. And the more you breathe, the more you exchange, you add more oxygen to that air. Yeah, but yeah, very cool. And so you set up a situation in that alveolus, if you want me to review with you, it's like 104 oxygen. It's going to be like 40 carbon dioxide. And then the blood coming back is going to be like 40 oxygen. So 104 in here, 40 here, oxygen is going to come out. And then the carbon dioxide is coming back to lung is 45. It's 40 in here. So carbon dioxide is going to leave and go out to the air. So that exchange takes place. There it is right there. And blood is going to leave the lungs, coming back to that left atrium of your heart, loaded up. It's going to have 95 partial pressure of oxygen because it loses a little, remember? And it's going to have carbon dioxide is going to be 40. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so that exchange took place until it's equilibrated. The air in your lungs and the alveoli in your lungs and the air in your blood are going to be the same because it's going to move slowly past each other, and diffusion will make them the same. Very cool. All right, I said I wasn't going to play it, but here we are at the other end. So in your tissues, you can see here it talks about being 46, something like that. So anyway, the carbon dioxide is high in your tissues, and it's only 40 in the blood. And so it's going to leave the tissues. Carbon dioxide is going to go to the blood. It's going to do that 3 ways. It's going to get into the blood on its way back. And then oxygen is going to be 95. It's only like 40 in the tissue. So oxygen is going to leave the blood and go to the tissues. All right, love it. All right, you guys. So respiratory system with age, what happens? I talked about cardiovascular system, the heart becoming, the muscle becomes more fat and connective tissue. All these things happen. With age, I mean, obviously a lot of things go wrong with your lungs, you know, emphysema, lung cancer, a lot of things can go wrong. But generally, a lot of elderly people don't see an issue because they're not highly active. And so if you took an older person and had them like run a race or do stairs, then you would see the decline in in the respiratory system. But often it's hidden because if you're not very active, it's fine. You know what I mean? But you guys, when you're young, you have this ability to really crank up your oxygen delivery, where an elderly person couldn't, but they don't notice it if they're not actually being as active. I don't know if you understand that. Well, I'm sure you do. All right. And so the aging you're going to have the less macrophages. So you have the cilia break down. So there's more mucus left in there. You're more likely to get pneumonia and chest infections because you don't move everything up as nice as you did, and you had that nice cilia, everything was nice and beautiful, and you had more macrophages. So more likely, more infections. Then I should say there's a change when you get older. Well, there's more bone instead of cartilage. So this cartilage turns to bone. You're less flexible. So you can't really move the chest like young people like me can, right? But you're just using your diaphragm more. You can't move the chest. And another thing that happens is they get kyphosis, is hunchback. And so the posture changes. And so the chest becomes like more barrel shaped and less able to move. And so they have a hard time really, breathing, like changing their chest. If it's flexible and there's like flexibility can move, then having kind of this solid chest, it's your diaphragm is doing this work. And so they have less ability to really ramp up and breathe really deeply. And it's thought, yeah, that we lose about a square foot of respiratory membrane every year after age of 30. Luckily we got 75 square meters, right? So we got a lot of, but we lose more and more, mainly because those delicate alveoli, the walls break down after years and years, and they start coalescing into bigger bubbles, and you get less surface area. So, and it shouldn't affect you, if you're not very active, but activity can't be done at a higher level if you don't have enough surface area for sure. All right. And just real quickly talk about high altitude stuff. You can see here we are on UNE campus, we're at sea level. But you can look as you go up into the mountains. Mount Washington that's small compared to the Rockies and the Himalayas, but you can see that the percentage of oxygen doesn't change as you go up, but you have less pressure. There's less molecules above you, so you have less pressure, air pressure total. So it's harder to get oxygen out of that air, right? Um, so things that are adapted to living at high altitudes, their hemoglobin is stickier to get more of that oxygen out. You get these Sherpas up in the Himalayas there that have even evolved. They've got mutations that allow them to better capture the thin air up there. And climbers, a lot of them use bottled oxygen too. And then I talked a little bit in person about athletes, and you look at it's cardiovascular and respiratory systems allows you to compete, allows you to move that oxygen to your muscles, right? And this is, like I say, this is a similar contraption that we use in exercise physiology labs, right? They see how much oxygen you're using when you're on a treadmill, et cetera, things like that. And one of these great athletes is this pronghorn antelope. Oh, amazing. I got a skull in the other room if you want to see it. But these guys can run, at speed for hours. They're just amazing. And if you compare looking at a goat to this antelope, they're roughly the same size, but look at the various things. You can imagine like if human athletes too, these things changing, but their lung capacity, oh my God, that poor goat. So you can see that, the pronghorn has huge lungs, has this ability is amazing. And look at cardiac output. And then muscle mass, you can see there's still more muscle mass in the pronghorn, but that's not a big a deal. But more mitochondria, more lung capacity in an athlete versus the goat, which is very agile. They're very cute, but you can compare this with humans too. It's not as dramatic here, but you can see how anatomy fits with the function. And then one last thing, because we're right here on the coast, is it's interesting in diving. These whales can go down 85 minutes holding their breath. These are mammals; they have to breathe. All right, but there's many ways they do this. A lot of seals, their spleen is really big, and they when they're breathing, they hold a lot of blood in it, and as they dive, they squeeze the spleen, and it releases those blood cells and allows them to last longer under there, and more myoglobin in their muscles, and they really kind of shunt the blood to just where they need it, so their heart rate goes way down, and they do what they can to hold their breath for that long. Anyway, a lot of cool adaptations there too. All right. All right. Again, got through respiration. So 3 big lectures, a little fewer lectures than cardiovascular, but a lot to talk about. So hopefully this one, we looked at the chemistry. There's some numbers there. We're talking about partial pressures of gases, but all this is critical. And then, with everything, comes around to COVID, SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus from 2019. And this virus, gets into our lungs. And then what happens with that and pneumonia can be viral or bacterial, but it gets in the lungs and it grows and it causes inflammation in the alveoli, and fluid and white blood cells fill your alveoli and you're almost drowned with these infections. So SARS, that's the big issue, and pneumonia and other respiratory infections, why they're deadly. All right, you guys, we are done. I will see you guys in person soon.